In this teaching, we're going to do our best to make it clear to the people the most misunderstood teaching as it relates to Jesus Christ and his second coming. His second coming is detailed in Matthew 24 and Revelation. And it was on this Mount of Olives I'm standing right now, and I'm pointing up to the top of the Mount of Olives that he spoke to his disciples. And they asked him, and he said, "Show us the signs of your coming." But prior to that, he was in the temple, and he showed them the buildings of the temple and the temple itself, and he said to them, "Do you see all these things? Do you see all the temple and the buildings?" And he said, "There shall not be there one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." What you see behind me are stones that existed during the time of Christ. They're in what the Jews call the Temple Mount. So the first thing in dispute in Christ's second coming is the location of the temple. Number one. So that's why we must be clear on the location of the temple, because it's Christ's own words that are at stake here. He said not one stone would be left upon another. Either what he said is true or it's not. Okay? So we believe what he said is true. We believe the words written in red that Christ talked about is true. And that there's no stone left unturned, and that all the temple was destroyed, all the buildings. And Josephus even described the foundation of the temple being dug up down by the Romans to dig up the gold. Okay, number one, we must then come to terms with the location of the temple. Number two, we must measure the temple. We see in Revelation chapter 11, a reed like a rod to measure the temple. Measure the altar and the people. Why? Because you must see if the people building the temple are following the instructions. What instructions are they following? What are they building? Are they following the instructions of the great architect that told exactly how the temple and the structure should be built? Are they building it that way? Are they making up other diagrams and building it differently? Okay? That's what it means to measure the temple. The tabernacle of Moses, okay, the other structures that Solomon built, okay, they had specific detailed instructions of how to build it, as well as Ezekiel, as well as New Jerusalem. So we must look at Herod's temple, okay? We must look at these things, and we must understand, are they following the proper instructions? We must measure the temple so that we are not deceived by seeing a temple that is not following the proper instructions. Here we are looking out over the valley, and now you can see the foundations of what we believe to be the fortress of Antonia. You see it runs all the way along where my finger is pointing. And these are stones left one upon another. Okay? So we believe this is the Roman fortress. They wouldn't have destroyed their own fortress in the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So we believe Christ's words are true. So then the question is, well, where is the temple? Okay, if it's not there, well, the temple is right here. It's in an area right next to a place called the Ophel and the city of David. That is where the temple is, or the temple once stood. Okay? So that, number one, is very important. There you see the Ophel. We have other archaeology that proves that what you're looking at right here is the location of Herod's temple. We're here at the southern portion of the Roman fortress. This area here has been well excavated. It's called the Ophel. Apologize for the wind. And we've many archaeological proofs of the existence of kings and prophets and everything there. What we have here is a road going this way, so let's do a little zoom in. Take a look at this area. This is where the Nethinims lived. Okay, you see the road, and you see this steep drop. Can you see this right here? Okay, that's the Givati parking lot excavation. And so that being west, and where we are is on the Mount of Olives looking east, thus meaning the area here is in the city of David is actually the temple. They call it David's palace, but it goes to bedrock, and that's actually where the temple was. Zoom out. Okay, now you can see this is this area here, lower portion, and so these are actually portions of the temple as well. So here you can see that when you measure the temple, when you measure the gates of the temple, and you know where they are, you actually can find the temple's location. So the Ophel is to the east of the temple, the Parbar is to the west of the temple, the king's house is within the gates of the temple. So we know this through archaeology and excavations in the city of David and the Ophel area. These are proven physical locations that were part of the temple. Okay, and we have other videos on this. We're not going to spend a lot of time. We have the whole playlist on where is the true location of the temple. We'll have links in the description field. But what's so important for you to understand is the blueprints in the architecture of who is building what. How do you know the source of the architect of the person building the structure? This is Herod's temple. You see the right side where it's like a T-shaped area? We know this is from the drawings of the Mishnah and Jewish writings. This is what Herod built. Now, he did not follow the Bible. Herod is not good. He was the one that tried to kill all the children, right? Well, this is his temple. And so when the T-shaped architectural drawing like this is depicted, you know it's Herod's temple. Solomon's temple was not like this. It was a straight porch with the pillars, which you're looking at here. This is Solomon's temple. And if you look closely, you can see that there's no teed off front section. There's just a front porch, and it enters into the Holy of Holies. But Herod's temple does not have this. Okay, here you can see again the front facade of the temple depicted. Now this is very important for you to understand that when the temple is built, and you will see something, okay, and this is the Temple Institute, their blueprint of their drawings of the third temple. This is what they're showing us. Okay, so now you know about Herod's temple. Herod's temple, what you see here, has this elongated porch. We don't see that in Solomon, but you can see when we look here, we can see something else called the Chamber of Hewn Stone. Now you can see the Chamber of Hewn Stone is in the temple. What is that? The Chamber of Hewn Stone is this. Okay, and again, where is the Chamber of Hewn Stone? It's in the temple. Chamber of Hewn Stone, it is a chamber in the temple. This is why you have to study the temple and the gates to understand what's taking place. Okay, so you can see they met 35 on this side, 35 on that side, and it is the high court of the Jews. Okay, so you can see that's exactly what this was. It was connected to the temple, and when you study this, that's when you begin to realize what's taking place underground. So here's the 70 Nations conference, and you can see how there's 35 and 35 seats. And the call to the Arab nations in English has this interesting statement.
and it's signed by the members, the great Jewish biblical court, the Sanhedrin, from the chamber on the Temple Mount. Well, what is that? I thought the Temple Mount was run by Muslims. It's not. This chamber they're talking about is the chamber of hewn stone. Remember we saw it, the great Jewish biblical court, the Sanhedrin, the chamber of hewn stone.
So could you imagine my astonishment 2 years ago when I saw this? I was like, oh my goodness, this is the chamber of the Sanhedrin already built. This is part of the third temple, already built underground by the Western Wall. There are 70 seats for the Sanhedrin. This meets the whole description when I studied it of Ezekiel chapter 8, of the two courts of the 70 and the 24. So this is what comes about from studying and measuring the temple. Once you know it and you see it, you say, this is the third temple. This is the chamber of hewn stone. This is the court of 24. And there's the court of 70, just like you see in Ezekiel chapter 8. So this is why we measure the temple. This is the area back here where the 24 is seated. So when the 70 nations and the Sanhedrin organize and they say they have a chamber on the Temple Mount, this is what they're talking about. They have a chamber. There are 70 seats. Exactly as the scriptures foretold. So this is just amazing. You really have to tell people about this, that there are chambers, there's parts of the third temple already built, they're already underground. More than likely we will have a situation where there'll be something on the Temple Mount, guys. Okay, here is the synagogue above us. You can see a menorah and the ball, and let's take a look at the other side. Okay, and here's the other view of the synagogue. And the other view of the new synagogue. And here is the menorah. Now, this is something called the scribe's chamber. And when we measure the temple, we find this in the first temple. We find this mostly in the book of Jeremiah. And through archaeology, we actually know where the king's house is. And next to the king's house, down below it, is something called the scribe's chamber. We have another video on the scribe's chamber, and we'll show you the archaeology and the proof through the Bula seals of where this is. But again, when you study this, and you look at it in a modern context, what would a scribe's chamber look like? Might look like this. Okay, so then again, once we studied the measure of the temple and the pattern, we can see a scribe's chamber, also underground by the Western Wall. Now on the other side of this is the Sanhedrin. Okay, so you have the dining room area, and then you have this scribe's chamber. This is all part of the third temple, already built underground by the Western Wall. This is why we measure the temple. So when you see the things in the temple, you see them in our day. Now when we look at Ezekiel's temple, we can see that dining halls are a major feature of the temple. Here you can see the northern side of the temple. The temple is in the center, and those red blocks are dining rooms. Huge dining rooms, multi-story, banquet halls, function halls, whatever you want to call them. You can see them there on the northern side, and they're also on the southern side. So dining halls, banquet halls, dining rooms are a major feature in the Ezekiel temple. Again, as we measure the temple, as we see these dining halls, as we see this feature, we could see this as well underground by the western wall, right next to where we saw the scribe's room. Here you can see the function hall completely set up with the tables and with the lights. And we went another time and it wasn't quite decorated the same way, but you can see it's a fully functioning dining hall and restaurant, which you might say, oh, okay, well, those are just function places, but this is connected to other things that are connected to the temple. How exactly this connects to where the third temple will be and everything else, we're not exactly sure. But what we're doing is we're educating on how to measure the temple, see the features of the temple. That way you can see and understand it if it happens in front of you. So now you know what Herod's temple looks like, okay? It's in front of you here. You can see the T-shaped front. You can see the gates. And I want you to look at this very, very closely and pay close attention. So you have one tall temple, right? Well, the one temple that's never been built is Ezekiel's temple.
After Jesus has returned, his 1,000-year reign will begin with the building of the temple of God. This unique temple was described by the prophet Ezekiel in chapter 41. And it will be from here that Christ the King will rule all nations. And all the nations will come to this temple to worship the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. The Word of God made flesh, the Messiah. Isaiah 2, verse 2. In the last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains, and will be raised above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it, and many peoples will come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us concerning his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For the law will go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he will judge between the nations, and will render decisions. Isaiah 9, verse 6. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end.
Now, Ezekiel's temple, of course, has never been built, and you can see it's a city. And you can see the enormous size of it, guys. Each of the gates that you see are about 10 stories high. So they're like temples in themselves. And I want you to just get an idea of how large this is and how large these gates are, because the Jews can't build this on the Temple Mount. It's bigger than the Temple Mount, okay? So it's important for you to understand that the millennial temple of what you're looking at, we must measure it and we must understand it. We must be educated in it, because Jesus Christ is going to reign in a temple in the millennium for 1,000 years, okay? That is what the Ezekiel temple is. So when we see a third temple coming up, and the Jews build it, and it's on the Temple Mount, and it's fulfilling all the Bible prophecies related to the Antichrist, we can't, attribute what they're doing to what Jesus Christ is going to do in the future in the millennium when we look at the measurements. Okay, when you look at this temple, when you look at it, it is going to be built. It has never happened. It is going to happen. So there are very large gates. It's a very large footprint. It's much different than what you saw with Herod's temple. It's much different than what you could see with the gates. Once you are educated, once you understand what it is that you're looking at, once you have a 3D rendering like this, it's very helpful. If you read Ezekiel chapter 40 through 48, this is very difficult to understand. So it's helpful when people do 3D renderings like this for us, so we can get a picture of the dimensions and the size and the scope of this whole city. This is a city, okay? And this will be built, and Jesus Christ will reign in this temple for 1,000 years. So this is why we're making it very clear where the temple was first built. What the Jews, if they build a third temple, what is it going to look like? It's going to look like Herod's temple. And number 3, what is the millennial temple? What does it look like? What are the measurements? When we look at it, when we look at the measurements, we can see major differences. Okay, remember when we saw Herod's temple, there was a large porch? Okay, this is the porch in the millennial temple. It's not like the T shape that we saw before. Okay, hopefully you're educating yourself, or you're learning and understanding what's going on. Now, the other thing about this is there are measuring tools that we need to measure. And Ezekiel's temple is small, but in the future there will...
Guys, another thing about the Great Pyramid, which you can see right behind me, it's based on a unit of measure called a cubit. Now, a cubit is typically a measurement from the elbow to the tips of the finger, okay? And there's measurements just like, a foot and, other measurements that, the ancients used. But that was a cubit. Now, there's something called an Egyptian royal cubit, which we hope to find in Saqqara. But here at the Great Pyramid, the cubit that is the basis for the whole structure is 25 inches. Now, the Egyptian royal cubit is 20 inches, 0.6 inches, okay, however, whatever that fraction is, but 20.6 inches is the Egyptian royal cubit. However, here at the Great Pyramid, there's a cubit called a sacred cubit. That cubit is 25 inches. Measuring the temple, and when you measure the temple, the thing that we need is tools, measuring reeds, okay? And you see behind me, I have 2 measuring tools. The first is a reed, like a walking stick. So guys, in Revelation 11:1, John is given a reed, like a rod. Now this is approximately 2 cubits, okay? So he's given this walking stick to measure the temple. Then in Revelation 21, there's another measurement, and that is a reed, a golden reed. So an angel has a golden reed, and a golden reed, guys, it's 12.5 feet, okay? Detail these, but I just want to give you a visual representation of a staff or a walking stick measurement and a reed. Now we have a reed here. And this is a reed. It may not even fit in the whole video, but the angel has a reed, which is also seen in Ezekiel. In Ezekiel as well, we can see this reed, and he goes about to measure the temple. So I'm doing this all the way back here, so you can see how large a reed is. That's 12.5 feet, okay? The measuring reed, okay? 12.5 feet. And we have also a walking stick, okay? So these are necessary for us to measure the temple.
Now, whenever you do a video like this, the people will say, well, we are the temple. And that's correct. But you're under assumption that the present era and dispensation will remain the same, which it will not. There will be 1,000-year millennial reign of Jesus Christ. 1,000 years. There'll be a temple, and that's before New Jerusalem. So guys, please watch the playlist, The True Temple Location. In it, we show you many proofs of how we found the temple. As well, please watch the Third Temple playlist. In it, we show you the synagogue. We show you many other things that are already fulfilled that people are waiting to happen. And we have a playlist, Measure the Pattern. That is the Millennial Temple. So thanks for watching. God bless you.